Welcome to the Top Order podcast as we wrap up yet another Champions Trophy debacle for England overnight against South Africa. We'll also cover the Australia-Afghanistan washout as well and look forward to tonight's game between India and New Zealand on this special Sunday morning three-way episode of the Champions Trophy wrap here on the Top Order podcast. Good morning and good evening, chaps. Great to have you on board Sunday morning / Saturday evening England time. But a sad occasion for you again, Jamie, and I won't go through your thoughts overnight where you were preparing for today's run sheet, but it wasn't a great performance for England to round out this tournament that has been thoroughly disappointing overnight against South Africa.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, both Binksy and myself were pretty worn down the other evening after the Afghanistan defeat, albeit to a better team. And I think again this is another performance against a really good side where England have really come up short very clearly. And yeah, lots of things to really sort of delve into. I think and sort of in one breath with the psychologist cap on, you sort of see that shift in momentum. You see South Africa are really super confident, dominant, have a clear approach, clear identity, and delivering their skills. And in the next breath, you've got England that are sort of scratching, still trying to establish what brand of cricket they're trying to play. You've obviously thrown a lot of eggs into the baskets around, Jamie Smith at 3 and this all-pace attack. And yeah, they just kind of look like, I guess, you wouldn't want to say this because we never know, but it looked like they were pretty firmly looking forward to getting on the plane. I'm sure they were trying extremely hard, but they definitely looked like a beaten side and one that had just kind of maybe run out of steam a little bit. But, is this South Africa's tournament? Is this the time when they really stand up? Because they did execute all of their disciplines exceptionally well, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But yeah, I mean, I hadn't had a drink since New Year's Day, but since England have lost the two games, I've now started to drink red wine again. So that probably sums up where we're at as England fans, I think. So
it augurs well for the commentary on this podcast. If we can open you up over another couple of glasses of red wine, I think that will be all to the good, although it might damage your reputation as a consummate professional if you come off the long run too much. Raj, a change in the England bowling attack, albeit probably enforced by injury, but no changes to the batting lineup. Persisted with Jamie Smith at 3, persisted with Livingston, persisted with the kind of order that they had, Brooke, Root, Butler, etc. in that middle order. Clearly wasn't really working for them, but they persisted with it anyway. They had everything to play for to send out Jos Buttler or Winner having stepped down as captain. Should they have done better with the bat in this game?
Well, it's an interesting question or interesting perspective because you say they had everything to play for and it looked like they had nothing to play for. It looked like they were just there playing a dead rubber and, if it comes off, it comes off. And that is, that sort of attitude or that, blasé sort of attitude has been seen before in some of, especially the sort of last test that they played down here with some of the dismissals they had down here in their test batting lineup. I saw it again in this one day batting lineup. The wickets at the top, Phil Salt especially, and Jamie Smith, they just set a tone for the rest of the innings, which was just really, really poor and not to a great standard. We talk about all these teams getting off to absolute flyers at the start of the innings. But it's a double-edged sword because if that doesn't happen, then you really put your team on the back foot when you're 2 for 20 with Joe Root exposed to the new ball, in the third over of the match. It just changes the dynamic of how the team is supposed to sort of close out an innings or go through the middle stages. Joe Root's there to consolidate through the middle, not to come in the power play and help them build a platform for, the batsmen lower down in the order. It'd be interesting to get your take on some of the comments and some of the goings on in terms of Jos Buttler leaving. Baldy, what do you make of some of McCullum's comments and Jos Buttler deciding to hand in his captain's armband?
The handing in of the captain's armband mid-tournament is one that it's a bit sticky for me. I know this is this is not the first time an England captain has stepped down kind of mid-tournament or mid-series. It seems to be something that recurs every so often. Every 15 years we get this stepping down mid-series. I would have thought it would be the best thing to retire, or not retire, but step down after the series is completed. I would have thought that having done so, though, England would have lifted a little bit emotionally and played better for their captain to try and send him out a winner. As it was, up and down the order, you have a look at some of those dismissals. They were either soft dismissals or they were reckless dismissals, and not just once, but repeated throughout the innings. You had multiple guys fall trying to hit the ball from outside off over deep mid-wicket, the short ball from Janssen in particular. And although South Africa caught tremendously well, I think there was a spate of dismissals in this innings where the England batters kind of threw their wicket away, and none worse, Jamie, I think, than the Liam Livingstone dismissal, which pretty much sums up the entire tournament from an England perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think it's a good bit of bowling. I mean, Maharaj at that particular point was bowling extremely well with good control, and he looked like getting wickets, pretty much every other ball, but. But yeah, Livingston, I mean, I think he could have played the shot 3 times, the amount of air time that the ball got. And I think, is that scrambled brain? Is that, is that poor execution? It's probably all of those things a little bit. Is it, just not reading the moment particularly well? I don't know. He'd gone in early. There was loads of time for him to bat. Like, does he need to do that? But equally, not taking anything away from the bowler, because I think it was an exceptional bit of bowling. He held it back. It was clear he held it in his hand, kind of put the ball right back in the hand and kind of, held on to it a little bit longer than you would normally and got the, took the pace off. So, but yeah, it almost like typified, I think, what England have been in this ICC, like just, like a little bit like, sort of thing. Like, is that it? Is that all we've kind of got to offer? It seemed a really nondescript shot. Not sure we could really pass on comment as to how Binksy described it in our chat, but
not without changing the rating of our podcast, I think.
No, but in some respects you can understand the frustration, because there was a lot of time. England were wickets down. It was a time to consolidate those overs and try and build a score rather than, go for that kind of big shot. But again, I guess, they would argue that they're living and breathing by the approach they take. Be free at the crease, see it, hit it, and you run the risk of dancing past one, which is exactly what he did. So, yeah, it's hard to critique it given how we think England are probably trying to play. We've harped on enough about England over the last few weeks in relation to this, but I still think that, like, what is the brand they're trying to play? It's hard. McCullum's come into this trying to probably find out a little bit more out about players and his selection, and maybe he's got more of a headache than perhaps he considered, because maybe this is the end of an era for some players, and maybe there's an opportunity for young, fresh, unexposed, to international cricket type players now to step up. But what does that mean for, the likes of Livingston, etc.? Is that the end of the road? It could be. It's not sure it's up to us to call out when players leave or not. It certainly isn't. But yeah, it feels as though it's a tricky time for McCullum in terms of decision making, I think.
And that's certainly the point that Raj made earlier. And to answer your question, Raj, the McCullum comments are particularly interesting when he was talking about the captaincy. And I can't remember which one of you guys raised it off air, but the idea that the next England white ball captain could come from someone outside the current playing squad is particularly on brand for McCullum. He's introduced Jacob Bethel, very little of first class and international experience into the side. That's a win. He's introduced Shoaib Bashir to the international side over the last 2 years. Very little international experience. That one's definitely a win. So as far as identifying young talent is concerned that has potential for playing international cricket, McCullum is right on the money. And he is, he and the selectors are making those posts a winner. What we're not seeing, though, is that freedom and that mentality of see ball, hit ball, and live free, translating into good game awareness. The things that let England down in this game was lack of game awareness, particularly from Jamie Smith. He's already seen Salt get dismissed in exactly the same circumstance that he was dismissed in. That's a lack of game awareness. You have a look at Livingston's dismissal. Root's just got out. You've still got Butler in there. You need to build a partnership. He's shown a lack of game awareness there in his dismissal. So I don't necessarily think the bowling is the lack of game awareness, but there is a lack of game planning there. And that, as you said, Jamie, they just bowl pace on all the time, it seems. And, they allow the opposition to get balls in zones that were there for them to hit. And you have a look at the South African innings. There's some terrific clean hitting by Van der Dussen and Klaasen in particular. And they were just spectacular in that middle order. You talk about momentum, Jamie. England are heading in one direction. South Africa are definitely heading in another direction. Is this the year that they can get past the final hurdle? We've still got a semi-final to play, obviously, for them, but they're going to play a slightly preferred opponent, and they'll get the loser of India and New Zealand tonight. Whoever that is will be a tough opponent, but South Africa should fancy themselves against either of those teams, right?
I mean, South Africa look like, we again repeating it myself a little bit, but they've kind of got players in form, haven't they? Rickleton gets 100. He's not repeated that in the next two games, but then you've got Van der Dussen come back in. Van der Dussen contribute. You've got Klaasen contribute. And in terms of their bowling department, I've been really impressed. I think with kind of like Vian Mulder and the role that he's had in terms of he's not pace on necessarily, but he's kind of varied it. He's been bowling cutters. He's been getting a little bit of movement as well in the air, and I think that's again kind of hammers England's approach, where you look at, for example, Mulder bowling in first change and looking at the kind of the quality that he's getting in terms of purchase on the surfaces versus this like three guys that 89, 88 mile an hour pace on and very little difference in terms of delivery style. So yeah, I think they're a good bet. I think. I mean, it's going to be an interesting last four, isn't it? I think it's going to be really competitive. I mean, Raj, what are your thoughts around the bowling in particular? Because we've gone England bowling. Where would you see that?
I really love the fact that the question was about how good South Africa's bowling were, but you managed to get in a dig about the one-dimensional attack of that England possess at the moment. So that was well done there. Look, I think that the South African attack, and this is a question I'll probably pose back to one of you, I think that their attack is possibly the best in the tournament. The way that they are bowling at the moment, bringing in Kagiso Rabada after the first stint, if they manage to take wickets like they did with Janssen and Ngidi at the top, especially Janssen, I think he took the first three, Rabada just coming on does not let any pressure off at all. The runs that were scored off Rabada, there was a couple of bad balls in there, but he was actually really unlucky with a few. There was actually a drop catch of Root early as well. And then Mulder and Maharaj, as you mentioned there, they just keep the pressure on. There is no release valve in there at all, which a lot of other teams do seem to have that bowler or that subset of bowlers that do release the pressure through the middle, and I just don't see it in the South African side. So they bowled really well, and I also want to just point out the fielding was actually really, really good. I mentioned the drop catch of Root there. That was just after I'd put in the chat, if they lose another wicket here, they could be in real trouble, and then Joe Root gets dropped on single figures. But apart from that, they were really good in the field. In Ngidi, there was a great catch, and I believe Janssen, there was also a really good catch of Harry Brook, and Ngidi's was of Jamie Overton, just to keep that pressure on the whole time. They had England backed up to the ropes and did not let them off. And they're going to be a real challenge for who has to play them. So just to answer that question, I'll come to you, Baldy. What do you make of this bowling attack? Do you reckon it's the best in the tournament?
It's certainly got the best fifth bowling option in the tournament. If you have a look at the way that the South African team lines up, effectively Marco Janssen's their all-rounder. He's ostensibly their fifth bowler, but he actually opens the bowling. He took 3 for 40 off 7 in this game, and he is providing an absolute point of difference. His catching was tremendous, as you said. I think he took 2, one in the outfield, I think, to dismiss Harry Brook that really he had no right to get to, and I think he took another good one in the infield as well. So he might have even taken 3 catches in this game. The point is that their fifth bowling option, probably alongside India's fifth bowling option, are clearly the two standout attacks in this tournament. And I really can't wait to see them come together either in a semi-final or a final, because I think the way that South Africa build pressure, particularly by holding back Rabada, who's effectively their strike weapon, they hold him back as long as possible to create the most amount of pressure with him. And Vian Mulder gives them a point of difference that a lot of attacks don't have, in terms of being able to put the ball into the wicket, as Jamie said, and do a little bit with it. The root dismissal was a microcosm of all that South Africa are doing right in this tournament, in that he took some pace off the ball, got it to talk a little bit in the surface, got the back of Joe Root's pad, and bowled him neck and crop. So I think the South African batting lineup gets a lot of credit, but the South African bowling lineup, as we've just talked about, also needs to get a lot of credit as well. Just on South Africa's batting.
Sorry,
go
can I just say
ahead. Go ahead.
Something
Go
really
for
quick,
it, mate.
Baldy. Just on Marco Jansen, actually, the two opening bowlers, Ngidi and Jansen, but especially Jansen, he really identified the compulsive pulling that England have. They need to play the pull shot if that ball is short, sort of up around the sort of chest region. And Jansen was bowling at about fourth, fifth stump, outside off stump, short, and that's how he got those first 2 wickets with Salt, Jamie Smith, even Root. When that ball is in that area, they're not just going to let it go through to the keeper. They're going to play a pull shot to it, and Root executed much better than the other two did. But the way that the South Africans executed a plan early on put them in an incredible position to just dominate through the middle. So great execution by the South African bowlers there.
Yeah, absolutely. And the key to that was they got the ball high and they got the ball outside off stump. Both of those batters had to fetch the ball from well outside off stump, and it was up at badge height. It wasn't sort of somewhere between, the belly button and the nipple area. It wasn't that where you can just get across and get in front of it. They had to fetch it from high. And neither batter learned the lesson really from having to do that. I just want to talk about the South African batting lineup very quickly, because Markram was injured in this game, didn't bat, and wasn't needed really as the skipper. He was sort of scheduled to come down the order, but they were missing Bavuma and Tony Dazorsi, their two kind of regular top three batters, with illness in this game. Stubbs comes in and gets a duck in his first ICC tournament game, only his 9th ODI. But Van der Dussen comes in at 3, Klaasen comes in at 4, and just really does the business for South Africa. They've got a bit of a problem now, though, in that Bavuma's their normal captain, Dazorsi's in reasonable form, Rickleton's made 100 but a couple of low scores. You've got to fit sort of all of those guys somehow into the side. Who's going to miss out going forward? Are we going to see South Africa going into a semi-final potentially without Tristan Stubbs or a player of that calibre, do you think, Raj?
I think it's an interesting one. I think that they have enough depth that they could play any one of those players confidently in that position. I mean, with Stubbs, he's never opened the batting before in white ball cricket at the international level. Perhaps might not be his spot. I'm not sure. He did look to be a little bit in two minds there. If he just batted like he did in the IPL, I'm sure it would have been interesting, or maybe a quicker finish than it was. I don't think that injury may dictate who they play, but I have a sense and a feeling, which is different to sort of how I have judged South Africa in previous tournaments, that whoever they put on the field, I think, is going to have that next man up mentality, and they're going to execute. They seem to just be really dialed in, and they're sort of scoring runs or taking wickets or doing their job, playing their role. The Aiden Markram hamstring injury was perhaps a blessing in disguise in terms of getting some balls, or getting the batsmen who haven't faced some balls out in front of into the middle there, with Klaasen and Miller actually getting some time in the middle where they perhaps haven't had from that first game that they played after the second one was rained out. So a little bit of a blessing in disguise. But look, I think that they're all going to be up for it, unless they physically can't walk or are really unwell. I think that they'll be able to put out an 11 that is very, very strong and will do the job for South Africa. I have no doubt about that.
It'll be interesting to see what they do. Maybe the Markram injury, as you say, is a blessing in disguise. It will certainly open up a spot for Heinrich Klaasen in that middle order, and then it just becomes a case of, what do they do with that, potentially just that opening position, because they'll have someone coming back into that as we get into the semi-finals. Anything else, chaps, on England, South Africa before we move on? I do want to talk about the washed-out game between Australia and Afghanistan before we look at tonight's game between India and New Zealand very quickly.
I was just going to say, in terms of that team selection for South Africa, would it be dependent on where they played the semi-final? Like, would that play into it in terms of pitch condition, or do you do you not think it matters when you're thinking about batting lineup? You go with an approach irrespective of kind of what the conditions are likely to be. I suppose you probably have an approach and you go with it. I was just yeah, I don't know what you think, but
I think they might think about a change in their bowling attack if they go and play in Dubai. They might take more slow bowling. They might take Tabrai Shamsi into that game and leave maybe Ngidi out potentially. I don't see them leaving out Mulder. I don't see them leaving out Janssen. They give them punch with the bat in the lower order. But I think maybe that they leave out Ngidi and Rabada opens the bowling with alongside Janssen, or they open with spin in that circumstance, and they give another spin option. I think that's probably the only thing they're thinking. But the question mark will be really, is it de Zorzi, is it Bavuma, is it Stubbs opening the batting, and then one of those three potentially coming into the middle order if Aiden Markram is not able to take the field for the semi-final. So I think they're the things that they will think about. Look, the order's working so well for them from a batting perspective. I wouldn't change anything really. And you've got guys, particularly in Bavuma, who can adapt to different conditions. And then you've just got firepower up and down the order. And I think if you're going to take on India, you do need to have that firepower in the middle order to be able to, go hard at that Indian pace attack. And which makes the battle against Jadeja and Akshar in particular a mouth-watering potential encounter when you have a look at their firepower versus the control that Akshar in particular and Jadeja have had over the course of this tournament. That looks to be a mouth-watering encounter. I'm assuming that they'll play India at some point. That's my assumption. But when they do, that'll be the real key matchup, I think.
Yeah, just to sort of put my 2 cents in on the order stuff, you're 100% right about the bowling. They'll pick whoever is available based on what the pitch looks like wherever they're playing. But with the batting, I think they really love their middle order, that Van der Dussen, Markram, Klaassen, Miller. They didn't want to change that. So they just threw Stubbs up to open the batting. Any one of those guys, Van der Dussen, Markram especially, could have gone up and opened the batting, but they just wanted to keep that middle order. They've got a plan of how they're going to execute when it comes to batting, and that they wanted to keep that. So they'll just sort out whoever's going to be in that opening position from whoever is available, and then they'll leave that middle order as it is, solid and scoring big runs.
Huge runs. Let's move on. I want to talk about the Afghanistan-Australia game a little bit. Not necessarily to give Australia any direct praise necessarily, but it was a no result game. Afghanistan, we got a fair amount of cricket in for a no result, to be fair. Afghanistan batted all their 50 overs, made 273 all out, and then Australia off 12 overs, 109 for one, trying to run it down before that first drinks break. I just wanted to give praise really to that Afghanistan batting lineup, because having dismissed Ibrahim and Gurbats early in the game, you would expect under ordinary circumstances Australia to restrict Afghanistan under 200. But as it was, Sadiq and Azmatullah Omarzai got them to a really competitive total, 273, nothing to be sniffed at. They've batted really, really well in this tournament. And Azmat in particular has stepped up in this tournament again. No surprise to us on the podcast, but might be a surprise to other listeners around the world, Raj, just how impressive Azmatullah Omarzai is as an international cricketer now.
Yeah, look, 100% credit to the Afghanistan batting lineup. 273, it was a score that you could defend, but they definitely left some runs out there. They lost wickets fairly regularly. That's probably credit to Australia when we get to talking about Australia. But some of the batsmen in there looked really good. Sadiq, I wouldn't mind seeing him playing some red ball cricket. Classical left-hander, looked very, very good. And then, as you said, Omarazai looked really good. He held the innings together at the end there when it looked like it could fall apart like a house of cards. He sort of held it together at the end and got them to that score that was defendable of 273. And I will just also say credit to Australia before we move on to them. Taking wickets regularly. The Afghanistan did a great job of not going bang, bang, not losing wickets in clumps. If they lost a wicket, they stopped themselves, they rebuilt, and then they sort of decided to launch. And it didn't quite go their way on this occasion, but on other occasions, you can see them getting to the sort of 350 mark, even losing those wickets early on, losing Gurbaz and Zadran, as you mentioned. This shows that there is some metal in that middle of that batting lineup, and even towards the end there with Omarazai as well, finishing it off. So great effort by Afghanistan, but perhaps not enough at the end of the day had the rain stayed away.
Yeah, maybe not. I mean, we don't really know, right? And the game would change when Rashid Khan comes into the attack. He didn't bowl in this particular game inside the first 13 overs. Australia got off to a flyer. Travis Head had some luck. Matthew Short was batting on one leg, which was unfortunate for Australia in that sense. But Australia were on track, but they had to get as many runs as they could while the pace was on and while the field was up in those first 10 overs, because we know the spin attack of Afghanistan is going to be a real challenge for Australia. And what they did really, really successfully is give themselves some leeway. I think the asking rate was down to 4.5, which means that you can sort of almost negate Rashid Khan by taking ones off of him. He's going to bowl the ball into the surface, so there is the opportunity to push the ball around a little bit. He takes 1 for 40 off his 10, and Australia is still on track for victory at that stage. So they did tremendously well to identify the power play as something to go after. And even though I said, Amatsai's a terrific cricketer, he went for 43 off his 5 overs, but that belies the fact that he averages 46 with the bat in ODI cricket now and 30 with the ball, so he's plus 17 as an all-rounder. That is world class level of performance. And I think it's a trend, Jamie, that we're starting to see with these Afghanistan teams and the Afghanistan players in particular, is that they're taking games deeper and deeper and deeper now. It's not a flash in the pan type of performance if they're to get up in an ODI. They are actually taking these top international sides deeper and deeper and deeper in these longer format one-day internationals, and it's terrific to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you look at their squad, that they have talent, throughout the whole team. It's not just kind of like one or two positions, So I think they are developing strength in depth, and they clearly have that. And I think also as well, I think their style. I think you commented previously, Jonathan Trott, and just sort of how calm he's been around that changing room and around that group of players. And I think it seems to be there is a calmness also to their play as well. That if they're as you say, you lose their openers early, but they consolidated. They didn't kind of panic. They believed in their methodology and believed in their players around them. And I think it's probably testament to the coach and the culture and environment that he's created. That he's around. Okay, trust your skills. Go out there, do what you need to do, and rather than we've lost our two openers, we're in the mire a little bit. It's kind of like there seems to be alternative approaches. I think that their spin department is clearly a super strength of theirs as well. It's getting they get excellent players out, they get world class players out consistently. So I think they're a delight to watch, aren't they? Just in terms of the style, their approach. And just also the caliber of players that they have at their disposal. So they are, I think we said on previous shows, they're not to be taken lightly at any point. That they do beat the bigger teams, as it were, consistently. So so I think it's been a good tournament generally for them, hasn't it? Pretty positive. I think looking at that game, I think 273 at Lahore is probably 50 short what we've seen in relation to previous games, but like you say, Raj, Australia bowled well. They took wickets when they needed to.
Can I pick up on that?
So I was going to get you to face that elephant in the room there, Baldy. Let me ask the question to you. How do you feel about Australia's prep through these first 3 matches? Obviously, with the rained out one in the middle there against South Africa, no play there. However, allowing England to set 350 and then chasing that down, I'm going to say quite comfortably. The sort of innings where they bowled here to Afghanistan, the pace bowlers, in my opinion, were a little bit wayward at the beginning. They let Afghanistan off the hook a little bit, even though they managed to get those wickets of the opening batsmen. The spin bowlers did a really good job through the middle. Whether that will be effective against the likes of an India in Dubai, I don't know. How do you feel about this weekend bowling lineup and your prospects going into these playoff matches?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to say that Australia bowled well if we conceded 37 extras in a game in a 50-over game. Spencer Johnson in particular, I think he's the one guy that if we had a look at the totality of Australia's bowling performance, and admittedly it's only 2 games, but he's the guy that seems to be the most wayward. he has the potential upside of a Mitchell Starc type of bowler in that he can rip through, as he did against, I can't remember which of the openers it is. It might have been Gurbutz in that first over against Afghanistan. Swung the ball back in and took out his off and middle stump. But that's actually not how he bowls. He bowls 145 plus, back of a length across the right-hander. And you have a look at the bowling that he put out in this last game against Afghanistan. You're right, Raj. It was wayward. He conceded 5 wides. He conceded 4 byes on occasion where the ball was just not in the areas that it needed to be. And I think if he's going to be wayward against India, against South Africa, even against New Zealand, he's going to get absolutely carted. So I think as much as we want to talk about the spin bowling, that sort of 4th, 5th option component of the Australian attack, I actually think Australia would be better served by having Sean Abbott in the side. He's a right armour as opposed to Ben Dwarshuis and Spencer Johnson, both left armours. I think he's probably got better defensive skills. And what we've seen in this tournament so far is bowlers with good T20 defensive skills. We just talked about Van Mulder earlier on, about 15 minutes ago, having great defensive skills. Those are the guys I think that are going to be important to keep the runs down, particularly if we're playing in Pakistan. If we end up playing in Pakistan for the semi-final or the final, defensive bowling and taking the ball off pace is going to be particularly important. I don't see Spencer Johnson giving us anything in that area that's advantageous to Australia. I think it plays into the hands of the opposition if he's going to bowl pace on pretty consistently. He is growing as an international cricketer. He's young in his career because of injuries and so forth. But I feel like Australia would be better served by having Sean Abbott come into the side. He also gives us more punch in the batting. So if Australia do find themselves in trouble because a lot of their guys haven't had a lot of game time, then an extra batter at 8 or at 9 in that order could prove crucial in a big chase. So I think that's the change Australia should make. But I have been particularly impressed in this game with Matthew Short's contribution, 7 overs for 21. He really turned the screws in terms of being able to restrict those runs in the middle overs. We've seen how important they can be, and we've seen what happens when Australia concedes 75, 80, 100 off of their fifth bowling option if they've got to bowl 12 or 13 overs because of rotation changes or whatever. And we saw in that previous game, Spencer Johnson only bowled 7 overs because Smith, as captain, thought he couldn't go back to Johnson. We had to bowl more of our 5th options. So I think those are the areas where Australia need to consider a change. I've been happy with the rest of their bowling performance, particularly Ben Dwarshuis, who's a little bit unknown to most casual cricket fans outside of Australia, but terrific in the BBL for many, many years. And you watch a lot of BBL, Raj. He's been outstanding in that tournament. Australia need to be able to win, though, the Glenn Maxwell, Matthew Short overs going forward. If Matthew Short's injured, it'll be interesting to see what happens there with that extra bowling option. Do we need to bring in more bowling to be able to combat for the fact that Matthew Short is going to probably miss the next game? And if he does, I don't really think we want to be bowling much of Marnus Labuschagne unless we're doing some hashtag admin to set ourselves a big score. Because I feel like he could go air miles against that Indian lineup if we play them.
Time for Steve Smith to get loose again then, I guess, with his...
Well, I think he's a typical Australian captain, Jamie. He doesn't want to bowl himself, right? Australian captains don't like to bowl themselves, particularly if they're spinners. But we're going to have to find something, I think, particularly if we're going to miss Matthew Short. We're going to have to find a replacement at the top of the order, which will make it very, very interesting, see what we do there. And if that person can't also bowl, so if we don't pick a Cooper Connolly, if we don't bring an Aaron Hardy somehow into the side, maybe we move Josh Inglis up to the top of the order, Aaron Hardy comes into the middle order, and we end up playing Aaron Hardy as an extra bowler, that may be the way forward. But yeah, we're going to have to find something to restrict sides in those middle overs into the semi-final and the final.
So if you had to give feedback, in sort of a customer feedback sort of way, what kind of emoji would you be on how Australia's played so far?
Oh, I think the CSAT's at probably a 7 or a 7.5, Raj. I've been pretty impressed with how Australia have performed, but I think out of 11, we've got to make a couple of changes. I think the injury enforcement to Short's going to create a problem, and we're going to have to maybe patch that with something like Josh Inglis or Carey at the top of the order. But we definitely need to make a change, I think, in that Spencer Johnson spot, because we're going to come up a different class of batting lineup, and a different set of circumstances that we're going to need to combat, as opposed to just being able to try and blast sides out with 145 plus. Because we've seen that doesn't really work in this competition at the moment, just the way the wickets are set up, either in Dubai or in Pakistan in Lahore. Anything else we want to cover, guys?
Well, I just kind of wanted to press you on where you think Australia's chances are now. So we've pretty much, we've sort of, we're getting to the final throws where we've spoke glowingly about India, New Zealand, South Africa, Australia. Definitely, we've spoken well about. But out of those four, I guess, where would you be positioning Australia? Is it still India out ahead? I'll let you answer rather than guide it.
Yeah, India and South Africa look the two best sides coming out of the group play. I think they've put in the most complete performances. They look like they have the most complete sets of cricket teams. New Zealand have overachieved, I think, a little bit, but they've also played some really good cricket in the lead up. Australia, by the same token, I think have overachieved to get to the semi-finals. Afghanistan played some good cricket. England played some pretty poor cricket, allowing Australia to get through. I think it's easy to conflate Australia overachieving with missing a whole bunch of their preferred bowling lineup, but the guys who've come into their bowling lineup have been pretty good. But I just think that Australia are a tier below that South African team and that Indian team. I think if you were New Zealand, who would you prefer to play in a one-off game against any of those three sides? On form, ignore the mentality of it. I think New Zealand would pick that they'd want to pick Australia out of those three sides. And I think certainly India would rather face Australia than South Africa in particular coming out of that Group B. So I think Australia have done really well to get to the semis in this tournament. I think that's more than a pass mark for them. Anything from here is a bonus. And I think Australia will try and play on the big tournament mentality. They've got guys who've come in and won big tournaments. They've won crucial games. So they'll believe in their ability, but they're going to have a lot go right, I think, to get past either of their two opponents in the semi-final.
Brilliant. So what's based on that, then Australia win it?
Well, look, you can't put it past them, right? Because they win big tournaments. They weren't supposed to. They weren't supposed to win the 2023 World Cup, right? India was supposed to win that 2023 World Cup, and Australia came through and pipped them at the post. So they have that mentality that they are able to step up in those massive games. But a lot's going to have to go right for them. I think they've got less firepower than the other two top sides in that top tier.
That's good. Hopefully we can put a short out where Baldy confirms that Australia wins Champions Trophy 2025.
Look, put it out there. Put it out there in the universe. Put it out there. That's fine. No problem. India versus New Zealand tonight. It decides the seeding for the semi-finals. We know where India's going to play. We just don't know who their opponent's going to be. We know where New Zealand's going to play. We just don't know who their opponent's going to be. I want to come to you, Raj, first, just really quickly on this game. How much of a marker is this going to be? How important is this game going to be, particularly for New Zealand, to know where they stand against some of the big teams in this tournament?
Yeah, this is a very, very interesting game for me. I use the word interesting a lot to cover a lot of different emotions. I just think that going into a game like this where it feels like there's nothing on the line, New Zealand's able to go out there and play with freedom, not be worried about losing this match, I guess. And that sort of sets up the inevitable, you win this one and you sort of struggle with the one later on down the line where it matters a little bit more. So I'm going into this match sort of not too much worrying about all the storylines that are on alongside it. I just want to see New Zealand go out there and give a good account of themselves, score runs, bowl well, and field well. In the last two matches that we've seen, they've gone out and they've executed their game plan. I just want to see more of that, regardless of who's in the side. And that's where it is actually interesting to me, who New Zealand's going to play. We're going to get an indication, assuming that everybody's fit, of what we think our best 11 is. Cricinfo is forecasting that Devon Conway and Rachin Ravindra are going to open, which would mean dropping Will Young. I think most New Zealand fans that I've spoken to over the last few days would find that surprising. You know our feelings about, or my feelings about Devon Conway and how much of a superstar and an elite level batsman he is. He just does not have the form at the moment. You've got to go with your form players in tournament formats like this, and Will Young is one of those. And Daryl Mitchell is just a big name, big time player. He always turns up for us when the going gets tough, so he must be in the side somewhere as well. So I'm looking forward to what that looks like from a batting attack or batting lineup perspective, and then also we need to see how we play in Dubai, what our bowling looks like in Dubai. I think that we have the bowling lineup to really excel in Dubai with spin through the middle of Michael Bracewell, Santner, and maybe a few overs from Glenn Phillips and Rachin Ravindra as well to tie up the Indians through the middle. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm not putting all the cookies in the basket. I'm not putting the house up on this game, but I think it's going to be an interesting in anyway.
Is that where it's going to be won and lost, Jamie? That middle overs, spin versus spin, India's spin attack, obviously, against New Zealand's middle order. You've got Kane, Rachin, Latham, Glenn Phillips, etc. And then on the other side of the coin, you've got Phillips, Bracewell, Santner as the primary spinners, a bit of Ravindra against that Indian middle order that's been absolutely on fire as far as this tournament is concerned.
Yeah, it's a great matchup, isn't it? I think that's going to be really intriguing to kind of see how that plays out. I did just have maybe a different perspective. I wonder whether, is this an opportunity to rest players? Is this an opportunity to try stuff? Like I don't know. They've both teams have earned the right in some respects to kind of do that. I just wonder whether they keep some of their cards close to their chest if there is a potential that they meet each other further down. Like I say, they both earned the right to not have a dead rubber, but almost to maybe experiment. Very rarely do you get the opportunity at this level to experiment, in a kind of full-on international game. So yeah, I just wonder, is it an opportunity to rest, or if not, I think that battle, as you say there, between the middle orders and the middle overs, I think is going to be fascinating. And in some ways, I hope they don't rest and change, because I am intrigued to see how that goes. But yeah, would you rest people at this point? Would you bring somebody in who hasn't necessarily had the yards in the tank, or what do you do? Do you go with your best team?
That was going to be the question I was going to ask you. Psychologically, there is one perspective of, well, we might see these guys in the semi-final and the final. Do we want to hold our trump card back a little bit? And when Raj and I watch a lot of basketball, you meet a team in a playoff series, you know you're going to play 7 games. You don't give your opponent all of your best, offensive or defensive sets in that first game of the series. You hold it back a little bit so that by the time you meet in a crucial game, you've got something new to show the opposition. On the other hand, though, we play so much bilateral and domestic cricket against, opponent versus opponent. The scouting is so good these days. The analytics are so good. We kind of know what the strengths and weaknesses of each of those combinations are going to be. So what would you do, Jamie, if you were involved in either New Zealand or the Indian high performance setup? Is it continuity and consistency of role? Or is it that next man up mentality that if we need Rishabh Pant to play a semi-final or a final, he's already had a bat in the tournament? If we need Chakravarti to play because of conditions, he's already had a bowl in the tournament. Which way would you lean if you were New Zealand or you were India?
Yeah, great one. And I suppose that the one I would always start to think about is, fitness first of all. So in terms of readiness to compete, are players fit? And if they're fit, that would be kind of the first check. Then I would be kind of looking at their, I guess, psychological readiness. So if there's an element of fatigue, if there's an element of, maybe just people are, feeling a bit under the weather or whatever, that would be the other thing. But my thoughts on, and kind of like, confidence always being the biggest psychological factor, and confidence will come from what we've just done. So you almost, if you've got a method and you're winning, you want to kind of keep that going. So in other words, play the same team that has been successful if you want to keep that momentum. Like you say, familiarity now at international cricket is such. They know each other's games inside out. No one's developing a Zoota or a slider or all these things that nobody knows about. It's really going to be around dealing with conditions, I think. And if there is a a certain approach that one team is favouring, and they want to keep that a little bit guarded because of the conditions, then they might change selection based on that. But I think otherwise you kind of want to keep form. If players are in form, keep that going, keep that familiarity with conditions and the atmosphere and etc. going, because I think that's likely to stand you in good stead. So it would be fitness, psychological readiness, and then confidence for me, I suppose.
You mentioned the big mo there, Jamie, and we're not talking about Mohammed Shami or that thing on Baldy's upper lip. We're talking about momentum, and New Zealand. I think New Zealand needs it more than India. Could I see India resting some people? Sure, giving Mohammed Shami a rest and bringing in the likes of Ashdeep Singh. It's not necessarily a like for like, but I don't feel like you're losing something from a sort of end results perspective, switching those two around. But I think from a New Zealand perspective, I would like to see us playing our first 11 and, going through what our game plans are to beat India when/if we meet them come finals time.
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I would be, if they go with that, which kind of I'm sitting on that side of the fence that I think they should. If there was a particular tactic against a particular Indian player, I'd probably be holding that back. If there was a particular line or if there was a particular strategy, I'd probably be holding that, because again, condition dependent. I think I wouldn't want to be showing that because they don't necessarily need to win the match. So why would you show all of that? But in terms of team selection, I'd go with the current team, I think.
Yeah, the only thing I would be throwing my trump cards at is Virat Kohli. I think the last thing you want is Virat Kohli coming off 100 against New Zealand in the quarterfinal, and then him going back and playing in the final, knowing he's just got 100 against you. So if they can, if New Zealand can nick him off at fourth, fifth, sixth stump, as has happened in the Australia series in the Border Gavaskar, if Henry or if Will O'Rourke or whoever can nick Virat off early, I would be throwing my trump cards at him in particular. But absolutely right. If you've got something particularly in that middle overs, if you've got a wrinkle, I would be holding that back for the final, particularly if it's a tactical wrinkle. We've seen New Zealand open with spin in World Cups before. If they're going to go and do something completely left field, I would be holding that back. And not showing India that particular tactical change. Anything else, lads, before we wrap up on this podcast? A lot to cover, really, from an England perspective. We've looked at India, we've looked at Australia, we've looked at Afghanistan and South Africa and New Zealand. We've covered all the bases in the last 45 minutes or so. Anything else we want to wrap up on before we get out of here and look forward to tonight's game?
Not from me.
I'd just like to say I feel better having spent time with you two than I did before. So the world is a better place now. So you've cheered me up. So there we go.
Well, Jamie, you normally do that for me, and that makes me feel happy. I think it's mostly Raj rather than me that's lifted your spirits this evening. It could also be a good glass of Cabernet as well that is mellowing the otherwise fragile Dr. Barker psyche. But we'll leave it there for now. And thank you all for tuning in and listening to us ramble on about the last couple of days of Champions Trophy games. One more group game tonight, of course, India and New Zealand, before we get into the semi-finals and the finals. We'll be back after every game to recap the event that was and preview the event that's coming up. And if you don't think that that's a continuity exit, then there never will be one. But thank you very much for listening to us on the Top Order podcast. Take care of yourselves, enjoy your cricket, and we'll see you again soon.